Wind howling at 80 miles an hour doesn't just bite. It shatters wood and freezes diesel solid. When the deadliest blizzard in Alaskan history hit the remote McCarthy settlement, million-dollar cabins became icy tombs. But one man survived in a pile of snow and made the experts beg for entry. Tobias Crane was not a man who fit in with a modern off-grid elite. While the rest of the McCarthy settlement was busy erecting prefabricated luxury cabins equipped with solar arrays, high-tech insulation, and massive diesel generators, Tobias lived in a modest, aging timber frame house. A former structural engineer who had abandoned the corporate world to study indigenous survival techniques, Tobias was widely regarded by his neighbors as a harmless eccentric. By late January, the atmospheric pressure began to drop violently. The meteorological reports were grim. A polar vortex was stalling directly over their valley. The forecasted temperatures were terrifying, threatening to plunge past 50 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by hurricane-force winds. While the community scrambled to stockpile fuel and board up windows, Tobias was in his front yard doing something that made his neighbors question his sanity. He was shoveling snow into a massive, 8-foot-tall mound. Garrett Hayes, a wealthy retired investment banker who had just finished building a $150,000 reinforced steel and timber compound, parked his snowmobile near Tobias's property. He was accompanied by his wife Clara and their neighbor Wyatt Reed. "Tobias, what in God's name are you doing out here?" Garrett asked, a condescending smirk plastered across his face. "Building a snowman to keep you company when the power grid fails?" Tobias didn't stop shoveling. "I'm sintering a quinchee. It's a traditional snow shelter. When the wind chill drops to 80 below zero, the timber frame of my house will leak heat faster than my wood stove can produce it. The snow, however, is nature's perfect insulator." Garrett laughed out loud, a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the frigid air. "You're going to sleep in a pile of frozen water?" "Tobias, my cabin has R40 rated spray foam insulation and a 20-kilowatt generator. You're going to freeze to death in that igloo. If you get desperate, come knock on my door. I'll let you sleep in the mudroom." Tobias calmly drove a foot-long stick into the side of the mound to act as a depth gauge. "Snow is mostly trapped air, Garrett. Once the crystals bind together, it will hold the Earth's latent heat. You might want to check your exterior fuel lines. At 50 below, diesel turns to jelly." Garrett waved him off dismissively. "My contractor assured me the system is winterized. Good luck with your ice cube, old man." The storm did not arrive. It detonated. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the sky unleashed a whiteout so dense it felt like being submerged in milk. The winds slammed into the McCarthy settlement at a sustained 70 miles per hour, tearing down satellite dishes and ripping the heavy winter branches from the ancient pines. Inside Garrett's fortress, the mood was initially triumphant. The massive diesel generator hummed a steady rhythm, powering the Radiant 4 heating and the high-end espresso machine. Garrett, Clara, and Wyatt, who had come over to ride out the storm in luxury, sat comfortably in the living room. Then, at 4:15 a.m., the hum stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, instantly replaced by the terrifying shriek of the wind tearing at the roof. "What happened?" Clara asked, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. Garrett grabbed a heavy flashlight. "Probably just a tripped breaker. I'll check the utility room." 10 minutes later, Garrett returned, his face pale. Tobias's warning had become a devastating reality. Garrett's contractor had installed a state-of-the-art generator, but the exterior reserve tank was filled with standard number 2 diesel fuel. Garrett had forgotten to treat it with an anti-gel additive. The extreme cold had turned the fuel into a thick, waxy sludge, completely clogging the filters and fuel lines. The generator was dead. Without power, Garrett's luxury cabin began to betray them. The high-tech ventilation system, designed to cycle fresh air through the house, suddenly became a liability. The hurricane-force winds outside created a massive negative pressure zone on the leeward side of the cabin, effectively turning the ventilation ducts into vacuum hoses that sucked the residual heat out of the house. By 7 a.m., the temperature inside the cabin had plummeted to 10 degrees Fair and was still dropping. Frost began to spiderweb across the inside of the expensive double-pane windows. The water in the toilets froze solid, cracking the porcelain with sharp, terrifying snaps. Wyatt Reed, an older man with poor circulation, was shivering violently. "Garrett, we can't stay here. My toes are completely numb. We're going to die in this living room. We can't go outside," Garrett yelled over the wind. "It's 60 below zero out there. The wind chill will kill us in 5 minutes. We have to try and reach Tobias's place," Clara pleaded, her lips turning a faint shade of blue. "He's only 200 yards away. His wood stove might still be burning." Garrett's pride fought a desperate battle against his survival instinct. He had mocked the man just 24 hours ago. Now his $150,000 fortress was a frozen tomb. "Fine," Garrett spat, his breath pluming in the freezing air of his own living room. "Put on everything you have. We make a run for it." 200 yards away, the world was a very different place. Inside the Quincy, the silence was profound. The howling violent storm outside was reduced to a soft, distant hum, absorbed completely by the 2-foot-thick walls of sintered snow. Tobias sat cross-legged on a thick bed of spruce boughs and closed cell foam pads. He was wearing thermal base layers and a light fleece jacket, perfectly comfortable. He held a small digital thermometer in his hand. 38 degrees Fath. Outside, the ambient temperature had hit 55 degrees Fath. Inside the snow mound, the earth radiated a constant temperature of about 32 degrees Fath. Tobias' body heat, combined with a single, thick wick survival candle, had pushed the interior temperature up to a stable, life-saving 38 degrees. It wasn't room temperature, but it was nearly 100 degrees warmer than the lethal wind chill outside. Because snow is porous, the structure allowed carbon dioxide to escape while trapping the heat. The inside walls had melted slightly from his body heat and then immediately refrozen, creating a solid structural dome of ice that completely sealed out the wind. Tobias sipped hot tea from an insulated thermos, reading a paperback book by the light of his headlamp. Suddenly he stopped. Over the muffled roar of the storm, he heard a sound. It was faint, irregular. Thump, thump. Tobias crawled through the narrow L-shaped entrance trench designed specifically to trap cold air in a cold sink below the sleeping platform and pushed away the heavy pack he used as a door. The 200-yard journey from Garrett's cabin to Tobias's yard was a descent into hell. The whiteout was absolute. Garrett, Clara, and Wyatt linked arms, forced to walk blindly into a wind that felt like physical blows from a baseball bat. Within 60 seconds, the moisture in their eyes began to freeze. Wyatt stumbled, his legs giving out as hypothermia severely compromised his motor functions. "Keep moving," Garrett screamed, though he could barely hear his own voice. They reached the vague outline of Tobias's timber frame house. Garrett pounded frantically on the heavy wooden door. "Tobias, open up, please." He grabbed the handle. It wasn't locked. Garrett shoved the door open, pulling Clara and Wyatt inside. They collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, expecting the warm embrace of a wood stove. Instead, they were met with bitter, biting cold. Tobias' house was empty, the fire long dead, the interior temperature registering a lethal 15 degrees Celsius. "He's not here," Clara sobbed, her words slurring. "He's gone." "No," Garrett whispered, a horrifying realization dawning on him. He looked out the frosted window toward the front yard. The snow mound was still there, a smooth, aerodynamic dome deflecting the brutal wind entirely. "He's in the ice cube." Garrett dragged Wyatt and Clara back into the storm. They fell to their knees at the base of the snow mound, Garrett frantically pounding his gloved fists against the rock-hard exterior of the Quincy. The snow block at the base of the mound shifted, and Tobias's face appeared in the dark opening. "Get in, quickly," Tobias yelled, grabbing Clara by the jacket and pulling her into the narrow trench. Garrett shoved Wyatt in next before collapsing into the tunnel himself. Tobias quickly sealed the entrance block behind them, cutting off the shrieking wind in an instant. The immediate contrast was shocking. To Garrett, whose core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, the 38-degree interior of the snow shelter felt like a blast from a heavy-duty furnace. "Take off your outer layers," Tobias commanded, his voice calm and authoritative. "Your coats are covered in snow. If it melts in here, you'll get wet and you'll die. Strip to your mid-layers." Clara and Wyatt, shivering violently, obeyed, shedding their icy shells. But Garrett began to panic. The confined space, illuminated only by a flickering candle, combined with the shock of the temperature change, triggered severe claustrophobia. "We're buried alive," Garrett gasped, his eyes darting wildly around the smooth, icy dome. "There's no air in here. We're going to suffocate." "Garrett, sit down," Tobias warned. "I have to get out." Garrett lunged toward the tunnel, his heavy elbow smashing into the side wall of the quincy. Crack. A sickening sound echoed in the small space. A fissure appeared in the dome, just above Garrett's head. Fine white powder sifted down onto their laps. "Don't move." Tobias's voice cracked like a whip. "The structure is strong, but if you compromise the arch, hundreds of pounds of cindered snow will collapse on us. If that happens, we don't have shovels. We will die under the weight." Garrett froze, his chest heaving, staring at the crack in the ceiling. The reality of their situation finally broke through his panic and his pride. The wealthy banker, the man who had mocked the ancient survival technique, was entirely at the mercy of the man he had laughed at. "I'm sorry," Garrett whispered, sinking back onto the spruce boughs, tears freezing on his cheeks. "My cabin." The fuel gelled. The wind sucked the heat out. It was a death trap. Tobias nodded slowly, reaching for his thermos. He poured a cup of steaming, sugary tea and handed it to Garrett. "Modern engineering relies on everything working perfectly, Garrett. Nature doesn't care about perfect. Nature only respects resilience. Drink this. It will raise your core temperature." For 2 days and 2 nights, the four of them remained inside the quincy. The storm raged relentlessly above them, but inside their quiet subterranean dome, the temperature never dropped below 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a full 50 degrees warmer than the frozen dead interior of Garrett's multi-million-dollar cabin. They survived on Tobias's rations of pemmican, dried fruit, and melted snow. In the quiet hours, illuminated by the single flickering flame, Garrett Hayes dismantled his ego. He listened as Tobias explained the thermodynamics of the shelter, the ancient ingenuity of utilizing the Earth's natural thermal mass rather than trying to aggressively combat the weather with machinery. On the morning of the 3rd day, the wind finally died. Tobias dug out the entrance, and brilliant, blinding sunlight flooded the trench. One by one, they crawled out of the snow mound, squinting at the devastated landscape. The McCarthy settlement looked like a war zone. Trees were snapped in half. Several metal roofs had been peeled back like tin cans. They walked in silence back to Garrett's property. The luxury cabin was a disaster. The interior water pipes had burst, flooding the high-end hardwood floors with a layer of solid ice. The drywall was cracked, and the expensive generator sat uselessly in the snow, its filters choked with frozen sludge. It would take tens of thousands of dollars to repair. Garrett stood in the middle of his frozen living room, then turned to look out the shattered window. In the distance, Tobias's unassuming pile of snow stood entirely unscathed, a silent monument to ancient wisdom. Garrett turned to Tobias, extending a hand. "You saved our lives, Tobias. And I was a fool." Tobias took the man's hand, a faint, understanding smile on his face. "You aren't a fool, Garrett. You just put your faith in the wrong architecture. The Earth has been keeping things warm for a long time. We just have to remember how to ask it. Survival isn't about how much money you spend on gear. It's about respecting the unforgiving forces of nature." If Tobias's incredible story of ancient wisdom conquering modern arrogance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your favorite outdoor enthusiasts, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable real-life survival stories.